Hi, everyone. Welcome to our November Book Club Favorites event. This month, we're discussing What We Kept to Ourselves from New York Times bestselling author Nancy Jooyoun Kim. Today, we are joined by the author herself. We are also joined by Elizabeth Heedy to help lead the conversation. Before we get into our discussion, I want to let everyone watching know 3 lucky viewers could win a signed hardcover copy of What We Kept to Ourselves. To enter for your chance to win, just leave a question for us in the comment section of this video, and we'll do our best to answer any questions live on screen today. And now on to book club. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Oh my God, we're so happy to have you. Can you kick us off by telling us a little bit about What We Kept to Ourselves?
Oh, thank you so much. This is so wonderful. What We Kept to Ourselves is about a Korean American family in Los Angeles that unravels when the mother disappears and a dead stranger is found in the backyard. And it takes place, it's been joked about that it's Y2K historical fiction because it begins at December 1999 in Los Angeles, and it's got this pre-apocalyptic flavor to it, which seems very appropriate to these days. So
I know. It's so funny. I think my description of historical fiction has changed recently, and I've realized that I might be officially old now because what I'm considering historical fiction is not what is called historical fiction anymore. It's a little rough to realize. But I was wondering, just talking about how you write from different perspectives in this novel, what is that like for you? Is there one perspective that's easier to write for? Do you kind of fall into one voice and then need a break before you can go to the next voice? How does that work for you?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, I mean, this novel takes place from the points of views of 4 family members in the Kim family. So we have one teenage son, a daughter in her 20s, and then a father and a mother and some of these people even speak different languages. So we're coming across not only different experiences, but different sort of cultural understandings of the world. And so it is challenging. I enjoy it because I think that it keeps the story and the momentum of it and the themes that I'm trying to explore very fresh because we're looking at it from so many different angles. I would say that in terms of what would be the easiest to write or what would be the hardest to write, because I think that was part of your question, is I think the characters that I identify with the most are the hardest to write because they require a lot of self-examination and a lot of self-reflection that I think, when I think about Sunny and her chapters, the mother in this book, a lot of brutal honesty, things that are hard to even put into words about what it is to be a mother and to feel alone. I mean, I had myself a daughter in My daughter was born during the pandemic, and I felt extraordinarily lonely because we had no help. We weren't not getting any help from like any sort of caretaker because we couldn't expose our family to each other, right? And so, in many ways, I identified with the experiences of Sunny, the mother, being alone in this foreign country called America without any of her family around, trying to figure out motherhood on her own because her husband works all the time in order for them to survive as a family. And so that level of isolation that I related to was some of the hardest things that I could write, even if it would seem easiest just because it would transfer the most readily to my own personal experiences.
That's really interesting. I love the idea that, you kind of like having the different perspectives, but it is also interesting to think about the different time periods that these characters lived in, because I think I thought of it as different personalities. Is it hard to write that way? But I didn't think about like, oh, I have to catch on that they wouldn't have had this, or this wouldn't have been readily available, or that's not how that time period might have gone. That's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, the time periods themselves are personalities, right?
Yeah.
In this novel, and I chose the 19th. It alternates. It starts in 1999, December 1990s, but then it goes back into the 70s. And I chose these two time periods because they have personal relevance to me and my life in terms of having grown up during the 90s and having experienced and some. I think I'm age aligned with Ronald in this book,
Okay.
and so I was in high school during the 90s, and so I completely relate to a lot of what he's going through. But for me, the 90s was such an interesting era because it was when the personal computer really kind of came into our homes and disrupted the relationship between parents and children. I think we had like one of the first times in human history when children were teaching their parents something, unless your parent was an engineer or computer scientist, you were teaching your parents something of great utility as a child, So like we have this reversal of roles that I think transfers really, really well to a kind of interrogation of the immigrant experience and how children are often translators, interpreters, and teachers of their parents when you're a child of immigrants. And so that sort of breakdown and that shift of power domestically is something that I think is really fascinating. And is a character of the book, the 1990s and the personal computer and the kind of invasion of our home and this new form of communication, while we're still trying to figure out just how to talk to the people that we love in our everyday lives. Here we have with this extremely powerful tool. And suddenly in 1999, now we forgot this whole 0-0 thing. And it's going to like blow up the entire planet, So it all seemed so wild to me. And it's just a fascinating time period. And that really plays into the personalities of this book in many ways, and the kind of the doom and gloom, the way that this book begins with that sort of tone, which is a very familiar tone to us these days, right? So
yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, but it almost is, it's so a part of the sort of language of, I think it's worth exploring and talking about and even laughing about to a certain extent. Because some of it seems so ridiculous in retrospect.
Well, speaking of the personalities of the book and the different perspectives, one that really struck me was how John and Sunny are both Korean refugees, but their experiences are so vastly different, both in the war in Korea and once they both moved together to the US. So was it important to you to include both perspectives, and what did you hope that we took away from each of them?
Yes, they are different in the sense that John was he was 13 years old during the Korean War, while Sunny was a baby. And so, but both of them were children of war, and they had internalized many of the hardships of whether or not they were conscious of the things that they internalized that were kind of necessary to survive the extreme nature of the things that they had endured as children. And so even though they had very, very different experiences and they came to this country in some ways for different reasons, at their core, I think that they were both looking for a kind of freedom and acknowledgement to be themselves in a way that felt safe for them, And then so for Sunny, that becomes art. For John, this becomes a single-minded pursuit of what in his mind is the American dream. And so I'm interested in their differences, but I'm also interested in the kind of core commonalities of the things that they carry with them. And it's striking. I think as human beings on the surface, we all have such different experiences, but at our core, there's something that we're trying to access that really kind of brings us all together. And it's unfortunate that this family because of the circumstances of their lives, because the way labor divides their family, because the way language divides their family, they're unable to find a sort of common ground to explore what they all really have in common and what matters to them. And so that was really important for me to explore in this book. Because in some ways, yeah, it's such a metaphor for this country in a lot of ways, right?
I was going to say it's universal to all families. I think, right now in this country, like we're facing a lot of times where it's hard to find or it's hard to remember the things that we do have in common and kind of hopefully focus on those instead of, maybe our differences all the time. And I do think this story is so universal to so many different families. I think, it's interesting. There never seems right at holiday time, which I think is why this is coming to mind specifically, but there seems to be this never-ending kind of parade of theatrics that can come from families and familial situations. Did you happen to pull anything from your own family when writing What We Kept to Ourselves? And if you don't want to say because your family might be watching, that's okay. We'll let
Oh, I mean, I pull from everything in my life. So of course, the dynamics of my family are very different from this family in the sense that I grew up, my literal family is probably closer to the dynamics within my first novel, The Last Story of Mina Lee, where I grew up with a single mother. And so we were very displaced, and we pretty much grew up on an island of people it was like a very intense sort of intimate way of growing up. I didn't have this big sprawling family. But I think the dynamics of this family are very relatable. As a writer, I'm very interested in how intimate relationships are a kind of microcosm for like the larger society we live in, right? And so, we think of this divided family as representing a divided country, a divided world on so many levels that has so much in common, but you cannot find the common ground to sort of stand together on certain things. And so for me, I kind of feel like the country itself and the society that we live within was more of an influence on the sort of shape of this novel, if that makes sense. Because for me, the father in this book, Jooyoun Kim, who starts our book, he's driving a dilapidated American car into the apocalyptic Los Angeles sunset, is very much a representation of patriarchy generally in a lot of ways, right? He's hanging on as hard as he can to whatever power he has, And so that to me was probably the shape of the novel was probably more influenced by the way I see society as opposed to like my actual family. But many of the experiences in the novel, like both of my parents were refugees, were internally displaced people, in a sense that both my parents were children of war. They were both people who were born and raised in what is now North Korea, and they fled during the war. And their trauma and the circumstances of their lives continue to shape my life. These are all things that I've internalized because of, the anxiety that my mother got. I mean, she told me childhood stories of seeing just horrible things that no child should have to experience in this world. And so I, of course, am in some ways a keeper and a passer on and a teller of these stories, because I think we need to keep reminding ourselves of what, these horrors are and what our responsibility is to other people, really.
I'm going to interrupt Elizabeth just for one follow-up question. Do you feel like has your mom read the book? I'm assuming she has. And do you feel like she relates at all to Sunny's loneliness that she experiences as a mother too? Obviously, she's had a very specific experience. You've talked about your own loneliness, and just wondering if she kind of found herself at all in the character.
So my mother does not read English. And so far, if there's any Korean translators out there who there have been, and there are no Korean rights, I think, sold yet for this book. And so she has not read this book. And the Korean translation of The Last Story of Mina Lee actually just came out. Like I got it in the mail yesterday, which is phenomenal. And so I get to send it to my mom. But so she has not read my work. But yes, of course she would identify. I grew up in a family of artists. And so Sunny is an artist. She's a mother. She's a mother first in this book, but she's an artist, of the heart in so many ways. She's a very creative individual, but yet her creativity isn't honored or recognized or seen by society. And so nor is it considered valuable, unfortunately. And so like my mother was also a painter. And I grew up in an artist family, in the sense that all of the art in this book, I didn't have to do any research for. All the smells, all the colors and the textures. I grew up in a family of painters. And so this is very much an homage to all the artists out there. And I know there's probably an artist in every single one of us who has a story to tell and who that, who needs to tell that story in so many ways.
Yeah, and taking it over to a question from YouTube that I think is well linked to this is, what would you like readers to take away from your story? And I know we talked about it a lot, but for the audience.
Yeah, I had a very moving moment yesterday as I encountered the final words of my first book, The Last Story of Mina Lee. The words are the final words of my book, and none of my final words are giveaways for plot. But the final words are, please, please understand. And then the final words of this book, what we kept to ourselves is, I have so much to tell you. And so for me, those are both implorations for people. A lot of people, I write stories that deal kind of heavily with grief in a lot of ways. And people often will bring up, wishing they had asked someone more, wishing they had asked their mother more, wishing they had asked their father more, wishing that this person had told them about this part of their lives. I think we all reach a point in our lives where we begin excavating the truth, right? And so my novels are in some ways excavations of the truth of these families and of ourselves as people, And so what I would like readers to take away is to not only think about the questions we can ask others, but the questions that we can ask ourselves and the stories that we can tell ourselves. I hope that people realize that, a lot of this is not just about, storytelling. I write about stories about storytelling. It's not just about storytelling, like verbal storytelling or written storytelling, but also, what is the story that we are not telling the world about ourselves, whether it's in the people you invite into your home, whether it's the organizations you volunteer for, whether it's the clothes, the sweaters that you put on during the day. We all have, whether it's the food that you share with your friends, we all have opportunities to share and tell a story. And I guarantee there's at least one person who's dying to hear that story, who absolutely needs to hear that story to survive. And so I hope that this encourages people to kind of think of themselves as storytellers.
I love that bigger message. And I will say, for someone who does not have it in me to be an author, I love the idea that I can still be the author of my own story without actually having to write anything.
Yes.
Not
I'll do the writing part for you, but
perfect. That's what I can, transcribe, but that's pretty much all I've got. Another question from YouTube. Jennifer first says that What We Kept to Ourselves stole her heart, and it's the perfect mother-daughter book club read. But she's also wondering about your writing process. Do you have a special writing nook or a place that inspires you to write?
Oh, that's such a great question. I love that question because it's something that I'm developing. I'm not a writer who has any specific rituals. Writers are kind of famous for their eccentric rituals, whether they're wearing capes or they only can only have like cotton touching their body or something. Yeah. Right? Or they have a special pen or whatever. So I don't have any rituals like that. I love if I can have access to it. I don't really nowadays because I have a small child. But my favorite writing space is a dining table because I love I love the way it exists to be looked at from multiple points of views. Do you know what I mean? You can sit at a dining table from so many different angles. And I kind of prefer that flexibility of space. And that also kind of ties to the way I write, right? I like multiple perspectives. I like multiple POVs. I like multiple timelines. I like multiple genres. So to be able to sit at a round dining table and depending on my mood to choose a different view and a different setup every single day would be like my fantasy. But instead I have a dining table that's full of kids' toys and packages, But that's my fantasy. Yeah, is a dining table that I can move around. And in terms of other practices, I think people should write as much as possible. I'm not a person who says write every day because I feel like that isn't realistic. I mean, most people have people to take care of. They have jobs that they have, there's so many things that are going on in the world, but to write as much as possible, and I try to write 5 days a week, every single morning.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it's really important to me and it keeps your brain tuned to the world that you're living in within a book. And it's kind of like playing an instrument or running a marathon. You want to keep your body aware of it. So.
Well, speaking about writing, we have a question from Deanna in the audience asking, will you write more on Korea? And a personal question is, what else are you working on?
Oh, great. Will I write more on Korea? I would love to. I mean, my dream would be to write a memoir. I would love to write a memoir I'm just putting this out there, but because I'm not emotionally ready for it, and I'm not like in my life ready for it. But I would love to write a memoir that deals with hiking, borders, and my father, because my father was in love with hiking. He actually died in an accident while he was hiking. And so I have a very special relationship to the mountains, and Korea is a very mountainous country. And it was my father's dream to hike. He never got to do this, obviously, hike the highest peak in Korea, which is on the border with North Korea and China. And so he was born in North Korea. And so he never got to return to his home. And so my dream would be to one day, I mean, who knows what it would be, like a wild, you know? Like it would be like, instead of a pair of like those boots, it would be like a pair of like my Crocs or something, like going through with like the little gibbets with like a Korean flag on it or something. It would, going through some mountains in Korea. I mean, but I would have to be, I would have to wait for my child to go to college, but and be much older than she is now to do something like this. My next book is another family. It's got a family story. It takes place in Los Angeles, Koreatown. It's got thriller elements, more missing people. I'm really interested in what happened during the pandemic. I don't feel like we're talking enough about it in terms of the grief and the things that were lost. Not just people, but in terms of the experiences and the emotions that really happened. And so hopefully by the time that book comes out, it'll be like at a period when people are ready to kind of look at that period again. Because I'm still fascinated by all of that went down.
It's interesting. I don't think we've all processed it as a group or individually.
No,
in a meaningful way.
In a way that's healthy. Yeah. Like I think it would be healthy for us to kind of talk about it. And I'm also very interested in, what was lost in terms of intimacy and experiences of touch during that period. I mean, do you remember how we weren't able to get our hair cut and like, our nails done or anything? And it was just this strange, weird, disembodied. And so, yes, it will involve the family and all of those things.
I'm so excited. That sounds amazing, because I have a lot of questions too about how kids have processed it. I just can't imagine growing up in a world where years of, your schooling, you were either at home or, kind of closed off to people.
I mean, and there are a lot of people who, never really kind of recovered the person they were before the pandemic. It was easier for some people to bounce back, and for others it was not,
Yeah.
Their job disappeared during the pandemic, literally.
And even for me sitting at home, I got very used to being at home, and it's a little harder to leave the house nowadays when you've gotten used to being in your little bubble.
I know. We've all been if we were fortunate enough, we were all like a little spoiled with that. Like I debuted my first novel during the pandemic, and I look back on those months. This was September 2020, and just how grateful I was that I only had to do the front part of my hair. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and also that we were all from the top up just dressed very nicely, and everything else on sweatpants on the bottom. I have one question for you that's not from YouTube or Facebook, but that I'm really interested in knowing. So one of the characters in the book, RJ, is an unhoused veteran. Why was that so important for you to include in this story? And thank you for including that. I feel like it gives a lot of visibility to it.
Oh, thank you so much for bringing that up. And not enough people, I think, it doesn't get brought up enough. But I mean, the reality of the world that we live in right now, there are so many displaced people who have been forced out of their homes, people who are looking for home. It is absolutely unignored. It cannot be ignored, especially in the state of California, where you walk out the door and it is an epidemic, of people who have been displaced, discriminated against in so many ways, people who are just struggling for, basic human rights. And so I feel as if when we are talking about a narrative about Asian American family who is focused on the American dream, which to them is home ownership, and that is a lot of people's American dreams, and that it is completely inaccessible to so many of us. It is unrealistic for so many of us to have that dream, whether because of the economics of it or because of racial discrimination. There's so many reasons why people cannot own a home today. Mm-hmm. It was extraordinarily important for this family to confront the reality of their privileges and what is lost in their struggle to kind of claim their own place in this world. And I wanted this family in some ways to be accountable towards the people who are the most vulnerable in this conversation, who are the people who are unhoused and who have been, and none of these issues I get, this term laundry list appears a lot because like my book, of course, deals with a lot of issues. I think that's sort of an interestingly domestic term for a book written by a woman. But like, a lot of these issues are not in isolation of each other, like
Yes.
I write about racism, I write about war, I write about state violence, I write about the unhoused, and all of these issues are completely related. They don't exist within silos. And I think that part of this novel is a discovery and exploration of how these issues are related to each other and the ways that, Asian Americans and this sort of dream of exceptionalism in some ways contributes to, the hardship of others without realizing it, and so it's a very honest conversation about that.
I love it. Thank you for including that.
Yeah, Nancy,
Thank you so much.
Such powerful topics that for readers to explore, and they just stay with you.
That's
and
so
as
sweet.
you write about these things, the question from Jennifer is: has a character ever surprised you?
Oh, they surprise me all the time. Yeah, they surprise me all the time. That's the fun of writing, for me at least. I want to be surprised. My editor, editors who have worked, Elizabeth, you were there, people, people who have worked on multiple drafts of this book know that I go through a lot of different revisions in terms of plot and like circumstances and things that happen. And the reason why is because a character surprises me and I have to sort of transform the narrative to really fit the surprise of that character. And so, most of the arcs in this book are complete surprises to me. I'm shocked myself when it happened. And then I had to go back in subsequent drafts and plant everything in, But in the end, I was very shocked. There are times in both of the books that I've written that I couldn't believe, who did it.
I love that. You're just as surprised as we are. That's so fun.
And then it hits me, and then I'm like, oh, now I got to rewrite the whole thing, And so I work that way. A lot of authors don't, and because they're much more efficient and clever with their time. But the thing is that I get my joy out of being like shook, And
Yeah.
so I feel like if I'm shook, the reader's going to be shook. And so if that means I have to put more work in and do multiple drafts, like I think 10 to 15 for probably each of these books. I love it. That's like the joy of this, I just hope that, people are along for the ride of how wacky and weird it could be,
I love that. And I love that we're along with you. Kind of feels more of a team effort instead of just an individual reader out there.
It is. Yeah, it is very much a team effort. I always think of a book as like an instrument, everybody's going to pick it up and play it a little differently. And I'm counting on the reader to play it. It's not anything on a bookshelf, It really means something when someone picks it up and brings their own interpretations and their own predictions. And I love to hear people's predictions. We won't do any spoilers, but it's so much fun. That's the joy. This is the funnest part. Yeah.
That's the best part of book club. I'm going to end with one more question that is from YouTube. And actually, I wanted to ask this specifically because of the season, but also because of your beautiful tree in the background. The question is from YouTube: with the holiday season upon us, do you like to gift books to others? And if so, do you have a go-to title?
Oh, that is great. I have traditionally not gifted books because I feel like everyone that I know has so many books to read, like I know a lot of bookish people. But this year I'm going to start gifting books, and I would do it very specific to each person. And the reason why I'm gifting books is I would love to support. There's been some indie booksellers out there who've been like, who've had my back. My book was just to become a finalist for Kalima's Golden Poppy, and that's because of indie booksellers who I love. And so I want to go and I want to sort of think about it as like a kind of like a challenge for me to kind of give some books out. But in terms of what I would give out, I want to read Jasmine Ward's book really badly, but I haven't had the time. Let us descend. There's a Korean author, Kyung-Suk Shin, who I went to see my father is the name of her book. And she wrote Please Look After Mom, which are very big books in Korea I've been wanting to read. So I would give those out. I love Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. That's such a great book, and it's so short. And so I can think of those few books that I would love to give out, and I could think of who would love them.
Those are incredible recs. And I do love the idea of it kind of being a challenge to match the book with
Yeah.
personality. It's like a game to play, to be honest.
It is. It's like a prescription. And it's also, if they happen to already have it or read it, find someone they can pass it on to another person, and then they could talk to that person about it. I mean, I just think it's like, books are such wonderful ways to start conversation, meaningful conversation with people that don't involve, screens, that don't involve, it's literally just, inviting someone to have a little moment for themselves, have a little quiet time, and to take care of themselves by like feeding their brains and their hearts.
Yeah, and I love your recommendations, but I will also say to anyone out there, if you haven't read Nancy's book yet, it is the perfect book to gift. And pretty much anyone can kind of relate to something in the book. So you can give it to anyone. As much as we're saying that we love these dedicated recs, I think this one kind of works for the person that you just want to hand something to, that maybe you're not sure what to give them, but you know that they'll connect with some piece of this book.
Yeah, thank you.
Different from the book.
Exactly.
Like what they're bringing to it as well.
Yeah. So we're out of time, unfortunately, because we actually have a ton of other questions that are coming in. But I loved having this discussion with you. I learned just so much. And before we go, I do just want to give one reminder that you can still post a question in the comment section to be entered to win our What We Kept to Ourselves sweepstakes. You can also join our Facebook group or follow us on Instagram for the latest updates. And please make sure you're keeping up with Nancy by following her on Instagram. Finally, Elizabeth and Nancy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I am so grateful for your deep read on this. And I'm so grateful to all the readers out there. Thank you for picking up my book. It's been such a joy hearing from you about your own families. It's been like just the connections that we've made over books has been the best. I mean, it's like my wildest dreams, basically. So thank you so much for being part of the dream. I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.